Welcome, everyone, and welcome to this second virtual offering of the Washington Foreign Law Society. I'm Juliana Canet, the president of the Washington Foreign Law Society, which was founded in 1952 to promote knowledge and understanding of international legal matters, comparative legal issue, and foreign law. This evening, we host the very first of our new series, Conversation and Coffee, or COTTE, with members of the Washington Foreign Law Society Board. Deborah Decker, Senior Advisor at the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C., will interview Elissa Alben, Senior Director and Head of Global Trade Policy at Pfizer. I hope you have, depending on your time zone, your coffee or your cocktail handy, sit back and relax. Given the number of participants, you will be muted during the webinar, but you are able to communicate with us via Q&A. Please send questions for Elissa using Q&A section on the screen, and we'll get back to your question toward the end of the presentation. Welcome, Deborah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Juliana, and thank you especially Elissa for being with us today and being the first in this series. Before we get on to what you're doing today, I read your background. It's quite impressive. You've correct me if any of this is wrong, Bachelor of Arts from Harvard in East Asian Studies. That was in 1997. Then you went on to Columbia Law School. From there, you joined Steptoe & Johnson for several years, and then you spent 8 years as Deputy Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for monitoring and enforcement. And this was under both George Bush and then Barack Obama, so that's pretty impressive. And then you were Senior Counsel for International Trade and Competitiveness at the U.S. Senate Committee on Finance for 5.5 years. And now you're at Pfizer, which, I mean, I don't have to tell you, but for the audience, I mean, Pfizer is in the Dow, and it's rated number 49 of all the world's largest public companies, with about 50 billion in sales. And so, you know, a large multinational New York-based pharmaceutical firm. So anyway, I trust that was all correct. But before we get to some of your work today, I wanted to ask you, like, how did you decide to become a lawyer? I had applied to a joint program at Penn for law and business and ended up just doing the business program. So,
you know, it's interesting. I think I always kind of take my career back to when I was 20 years old, and I took a course on the Japanese economy from a professor, and he had a theory of industrial policy that I have to say, it was just one of those moments. I found the theory, I found it all fascinating. I thought his work was really interesting. I got really excited about industrial policy and trade policy. And I came at it through trade policy. And what I realized was that pretty quickly that trade policy is really done in Washington. And most of the people who do it are lawyers by training. Now, whether or not they are, you know, whether that degree is essential to what we do is probably an open question, but it seemed like a credential that was going to be useful to me. So I went for it and I got my law degree. I did spend a couple of years in Washington before law school doing trade-related work. So it was a good preview for that career.
Well, that's kind of interesting, especially since we have a number of students online. So you spent some time after you went to Harvard, before you went to Columbia Law School. Tell us more about that, because that's where a lot of people are today.
Right. So I was keen to do trade policy. I think one thing about, I mean, for whatever reason, and that's why I think that professors, anyone who teaches undergrad or graduate school, you have a profound ability to influence people's lives. And I think that I really got this bug to do trade. And so I applied for all these internships and jobs, trade-related jobs. I ended up getting an internship in the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative in the Asia Pacific office. And then I also got a job working as a legal assistant on the Kodak film case, which was a big case at the time of the WTO. So I was working for the law firm that was representing Kodak in that case. And so I came down to Washington, and I started at USTR as an intern, and I was blown away. I was just in love with the building, with the people, with the whole vibe, and I just knew I was one way or another, I was going to find my way back there. So yeah.
So you managed to do it. So when you joined Steptoe, were you still working on trade, or did you have to?
Oh yeah, no, I entered, when I came to Steptoe, I joined their international department. I started doing trade. I did subsidies. I did WTO litigation, a lot of work involving Canada. And I was just so fortunate because I worked for some incredible partners there who just, really, it was a time, and this is another, feeling that I have. I really think that, if you happen to find someone who's prepared to mentor you when you're young, who's going to teach you how to be a really capable attorney, that is a gift. And I feel very, so much gratitude that I had a few people like that at Steptoe who really kind of took me under their wing and showed me the ropes. And that was a great experience. So.
And then from there, you got this, I guess, was it an appointment or was it a GS level job?
So yeah, it was a GS job. It was in the general counsel's office. So I started out in I was always in the general counsel's office, but I started out as a line attorney at USTR, and that role, it's USTR is a special place, and everyone who's worked there will say that. I think as an attorney, I immediately, got tossed in at the deep end. We basically split our time between litigation at the World Trade Organization and negotiations. So my one of the first responsibilities I had was I got assigned to the Korea FTA negotiations, and that was just kicking off as I came into USTR. And I took charge eventually of the autos negotiations, the TBC part, the electronic commerce, what was then called electronic commerce part of the negotiation, and market access. And that negotiation, the other thing I think is just the reality of being a trade lawyer, is that all trade issues, they never die. They always just go on and on and on. So I spent 8 years at USTR, and I think I worked on the Korea negotiations pretty much the entire time. I also was able to do some great trade cases at the WTO, which was just that was a very special experience. There is nothing quite like standing up, and as I'm sure you can appreciate, standing up in an international organization and saying that, on behalf of the United States, and it's just a really, just a neat experience to have professionally.
That must have been something, because you probably weren't very old at that point, and there you were.
That's right.
Speaking on behalf of the United States government. How did that feel, and how long did you have to be there? That was in Geneva, right? WTO?
That's right. So, we were, it was a small but mighty group at USTR at the time. I think the GC's office has grown a bit since then, but still, it's a very lean organization, and you get a ton of responsibility thrown your way kind of when you walk in the door. And I came in, and I had to write all my briefs. I, made all the arguments. And again, you pull from the mentorship that you had before in organizations where there's capacity. But I will also say there were some really great old hands at USTR who knew every single thing you could possibly care to know about the history of the WTO, about, the case law. And, just to be around them, you sort of pick up so much knowledge, skill. And again, I think I was really in the right place at the right time, because this major negotiation really ended up being key, not just for the Bush administration's policy, but then we had a changeover in administration. That's when I took over as chief lawyer for the agreement overall, and helped work with the the new policy, the new political lead develop, to try and develop a trade policy that would work for the Obama administration. And that was just a very exciting time. And we ultimately were successful in concluding a deal that worked for them and passing it through Congress. And that was a whole different experience, getting a trade deal passed through Congress and approved. That was really exciting as well.
How much does the change in leadership really affect policy? I ask because I know, current administration, of course, has taken a great leap forward in killing a lot of the policies that may have gone before, or revamping them, I would, to some extent. But I know in the field that I work in, sometimes it's much more, small step by small step. I work in, so, I mean, is there the ability to really make major changes in policy?
Well, I mean, I think that a lot of policy, that a lot of the day-to-day that happens in an agency like USTR is actually not different from Republican to Democratic administration or administration to administration. Every American thinks it's a good idea to enforce the rules. I think it's hard to, those are kind of not really negotiable. And even though I think this current administration has a lot of different views on how to approach trade, I will say that some of the criticisms that they've raised and the challenges that they're trying to address, they're very familiar to those of us who have been doing trade for a while. And so even there, I think there's a certain continuity that you can see in terms of the challenges and the policies that people are trying to change.
So how did you come to the position you're in? I mean, you went from government to a specific industry, pharmaceuticals, that is obviously today on the forefront of the current pandemic. How did that happen? And what do your days look like today, especially compared to your government days?
Well, I'd been in government.
Today's days are very different. I mean,
yes,
like pre-coronavirus, right?
Right. Well, I've been in government for a long time, and it's funny, when I came to USTR, I never intended to stay for as long as I did. I figured I would come, maybe spend 3 or 4 years, learn a bit about litigating litigating WTO cases, go back to private practice, and kind of go along. But I ended up staying because I really loved all the the work and the experience. And then I just this opportunity to go to the Hill came to me, and that was just a lot of fun. And but after a while, I realized that I really had probably exhausted a lot of what the experiences that are to be had. We did 4 major trade bills while I was on the finance committee, which was a pretty extraordinary experience to have. And you can't really repeat that. So I started looking around and thinking about what I wanted to do next. And this opportunity just sort of came my way, and it ended up being a great fit. And so, being able to lead a trade policy team for a large company that's got lots of complicated challenges globally has been, it's a new challenge. It's really exciting. And I think it's obviously this current situation has really made it even more meaningful, honestly. Like, I think that, everyone, there's been a number of times in my career where you're surrounded by people who truly believe in the mission, who really want to, or trying very hard to accomplish something very important and meaningful. And this happens to be one of those times where we are right now. And I think that it's kind of, it's a really good feeling to be surrounded by so many people who are trying so hard to do their very best on something that's so critical to everyone. And so I think it's very mission driven right now, which is special. It's obviously very difficult. I think it's difficult for everybody. It's hard to figure out, how to get through the day sometimes because there's so much going on. But but it's been a really exciting and very interesting experience.
I know when I went from government to the private sector, it was like a breath of fresh air, to be honest, because of all the requirements of being in a government agency, and then the relative. Well, I mean, I was with a big company, so and as are you, so there's still a lot of structures in place, but it's.
Well,
I found it different. What do you find?
I think it's different in some ways, but I guess I think that, you know, I always felt like every organization that I worked for, the question is always, you know, how much can you have an impact in the area that you are, you know, in your area of expertise? Like, how much do you feel like you can be, affecting change in your space, your area of knowledge? And I always felt like where I happened to be, I felt very empowered, and I felt empowered when I was at USTR because we were sort of at the kind of at the top of the ladder in terms of trade policy making. I felt very empowered on the Hill because we were writing those bills and passing them, and I feel very empowered in many ways now where I sit. And it's not. I guess I think that I came to the private sector in part because I wanted to understand better what it is like for people to think about company challenges on a day-to-day basis and how companies do think about the trade policy that I've been sort of wrestling with from the government side. And I've found that to be it's a very important thing to understand. If you're interested in policy making, it's important to understand how companies are dealing with those policies on a day-to-day basis on the ground, and how they think about policy and how they make decisions about policy. And so that's been a really important learning experience. But I have enjoyed and valued every kind of experience that I've had in the trade space, and I think I've learned a lot from each place where I've had to sit.
Go to questions. I'm intrigued by your title because I didn't think of Pfizer as having a head of global trade policy. It's not like they're making policy. So could you explain a little bit? Are you responding to policy? Or are you trying to influence government and say, hey, this is the policy we need, or tell us more about that?
Yeah, so it's international government affairs, and so a lot of it is thinking about policy and trying to talk to governments and understand their policy objectives, but also kind of communicate the policies that would be helpful to the company. And so trade is a big part of the business. We are a large company. We're also a large manufacturer. We move goods all around the world, but we also have a lot of complex issues that implicate our trade obligations globally. So I think most large companies have to have somebody who can interact with the trade experts in the government in this way, and that's what
so it kind of advised them if they pass a certain law or if some things go a certain way, this is how it would affect Pfizer or
right. And policymakers sometimes are encountering problems. They need to figure out a way to solve them. They want the business community to kind of move in a particular direction, and it's important for them to understand how companies might respond to different policy scenarios.
Well, I know I received a couple of questions ahead of time, but before I even go to those, I have to tell you, and now that we're all buying things online, I mean, we were before this, but certainly we are now. I'm even getting my food delivered online, from ordering online. When you go into a store, I mean, you can look at your label and say where it's made. And I have a fun thing at the holidays. I only try to buy made in America, which is really hard to find. And even with the food, I try to buy local. I can't tell on e-commerce where I'm buying from at all. I mean, sometimes on Amazon it tells you, sometimes it doesn't. So I just actually sent a letter to my congressman saying, hey, why is this? If we're trying to protect American jobs, and you know, I personally believe in international trade, but on the other hand, you know, at the margin, I'd rather buy American. I can't even tell that. Is, you know, this may not be your area at all, but it just in my life kind of came up recently, and I was like, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, labeling is a little bit, country of origin labeling is a little different than, you know, manufacturing and where the products are made sometimes. But yeah, and obviously we don't do online sales, but I think, you know, I think it would be an interesting question if we have a board member who works in the space of with some of the tech companies to understand how consumers are using technology differently now in the context of this pandemic. I think that would be a really interesting discussion to have.
Okay, maybe we'll save that for the future. But even our pharmaceuticals, I noticed that one prescription I have, it changed from one country to another, and it's like, oh, that's strange. You know, anyway, for the future, to your point. Juliana, did you want to lead off with one of the questions you have, and I'll get to some of the ones that I have received?
Sure. So we have a couple of questions. I can group couple of the same topic, and they are from recent graduated students. Do you have any advice for recent graduates that would like to work in this field of trade given the current circumstances? And then we have another question. What is the most challenging aspect of negotiating trade agreement, if there is a difference between negotiation for the government and for private sector?
So, so in terms of getting into the field of trade, I think that it's really important to take a job where you're going to, especially when you're starting out, that's a time to get the real technical foundation. There's a lot of directions you can go in trade. You can go work on the Hill, you can go work in the administration, you can go work for a law firm. You know, I think that I always tell people this, that when you're younger, you have this opportunity, first of all, to work very hard, because usually when you're younger, you don't have responsibilities, but you also have an opportunity to absorb a lot of information, which is really what you need. You need to go someplace where you're going to be developing that sort of technical foundation that will help guide you later on when you don't have the time or the wherewithal to get deep on particular issues. Mm-hmm. Trade policy, you know, I found it, I was very fortunate to have started out doing real technical nuts and bolts work at a law firm, which I drew on when I was at USTR, and my portfolio was, you know, 15 issues that were so disparate and so complex that I would never have enough time to dive that deep into any one of them. But by having had that technical skill building experience, I knew what questions to ask. I kind of knew the lay of the land and where to get answers, and that has served me. It's just served me so well. So that's what I would suggest. Find some place where you can work really hard and you can get that kind of technical grounding in trade.
I don't know if you want to address the second one about the negotiation.
Negotiating for the. So I always feel that, you know, when you're sitting at USTR, you feel like you really understand what the dynamic is in negotiation. When you're up on the Hill, you understand a little bit less. And then when you're in the private sector, you're even further removed. So part of the challenge when you're in the private sector is trying to understand the dynamic between the governments and trying to make sure that your advice is kind of meshing with that dynamic, and that it's supportive and helpful to the negotiators who are sitting in the room and dealing with that dynamic. So there's a lot of work that you have to do when you're in the private sector just to understand what's going on, whereas in the government, you're sitting in the chair and you know exactly what's going on, except you may not know how best to solve the problem that you're confronted with. So there's a communication that's required between the government negotiators and the private sector to come up with these solutions. And so that's the kind of difference to me, that you just know you have a different subset of facts when you're in the negotiation there.
Thank you. We have, Deborah, we have another one additional, and then I give you the floor. This is on production. Given the COVID-19 crisis and current political winds, what do you think about a shift of production to US or US territories? I'm asking with a particular interest in Puerto Rico, where Pfizer is present.
So I would just say that I think the one thing that I have learned is that our supply chains are really complicated. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, to have supply chains that are not just located in one place, but are in different places. And actually, Puerto Rico is a good example. When we had a terrible storm in Puerto Rico, it was important to have other locations that could pick up and help support production. And so I think that, I think we all understand why some policymakers would like more production in the US. But I think we also have to be mindful of how to build these resilient supply chains.
And I had is, we have all had professional challenges in our lives. It could be some boss or a job that we've had that was particularly difficult or challenging. How did you handle that? Or how could you advise young people? We've all faced different challenges. Any advice on that?
So, yeah, I mean, first of all, I think you have to be doing something that you love to do, because the workplace is never perfect sunshine and rainbows. And there's always going to be things, there can always be bad days. And if you love the substance of what you do, it can carry you through a lot. But I also think that we have to kind of take stock of our own, of our own needs, and be advocates for ourselves. I had to supervise attorneys at USTR. I have a team now, and I always feel that it's important for people to speak up and to feel comfortable speaking up and expressing exactly what their needs are. And that is, to me, the only way that you get through those difficult spots, is you advocate for yourself. So I definitely had some, I had some tough moments in my career. I think that, it was not always easy, raising kids at USTR, but I always kind of had to keep track of my own needs and make sure that I was at least sharing those concerns and those needs with those who were able to fix my environment. And that's kind of, and I also recognize that, it's like the weather, you just wait a minute and things change.
So waiting it out and advocating for yourself, and maybe setting some boundaries so that you can.
Right, and picking something that you love to do.
Picking up, most important, picking something that you love to do.
Yeah.
Juliana, do you have, I have another one. Okay. So the lawyers in this time of crisis can play the role of facilitator for innovative solutions. And in your field, it could be, I guess, supply chain or guardians of established rights, such as privacy, competition. How do you draw the balance, especially in a private company, when you're, I know there's some new COVID drugs that have come out with Pfizer, but how do you facilitate solutions between trade policy and government policy, particularly, and Pfizer, what would be good for Pfizer, particularly in today's environment?
Well, I mean, you have to think about the common ground. I mean, I've sat at USD, I've sat in the administration, I've sat on the Hill, and I've sat in a company, and I know that actually there's a lot of common ground about where people, where good policy sits. People want, there's many places where you really just want, everyone wants the same thing, but no one can quite figure out how to get there. And you need to be, in the work that I do, where, trade is about creating, more and better trade. Trade policy is about how do we create the rules of the road that will enable more and more effective trade. And that's kind of the bottom line for what we do. And so companies in the private sector, they've got to be involved in making those judgments, because they're the ones who are actually moving the goods, making the services happen overseas. They're the ones that are actually kind of going to, whether or not they react the way you want them to, really key to whether your policy is successful or not. So I don't think of it as this kind of tug of war as much as I think it's kind of everyone trying to understand their shared objectives and really trying to figure out what are the different policy levers that are going to get everyone there.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. I was in the Middle East and was talking to the head of the Arab League, who said to the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, we all know how it's going to end, it's just getting there that's so hard. So, I don't think that's true anymore. But
well, there's no question about it. Yeah, sometimes it's not so easy, but
yeah. But so if this is okay, I just want to delve into the personal level, because I know we're all, the three of us being women, had to manage careers in special ways. And before the call started, I told you about some of my compromises with the children. So how has family affected your career or your choices, and how did you manage to balance them?
So I had 3 kids at USTR. I had and when I was in the GC's office, and I mean, looking back, I mean, for me personally, it worked okay, because I lived fairly close to the office, and babies are up in the middle of the night, and so is Geneva. And so I was able to check in, and I did not get a lot of sleep, no denying that. I had great support. I mean, we had great support, great childcare. I'm very grateful for that. I felt like I was able to make it work. I don't think any person going into having kids and whatnot, can know at the outset whether what kind of balance is going to work for them. And that's why I say, you always just have to be checking in with yourself and knowing what you need, and being able to communicate that to your superiors, because otherwise, you're kind of adrift, and you may get very frustrated. But for me, it just kind of, I was lucky in a lot of ways. The timing of my litigation, for whatever reason, I had a case involving Europeans, and I went on maternity leave, and I came back, and we filed the case. I went on maternity leave again, then we did the appeal when I came back, and the timing worked out magically.
Wait, so did they time the actual filing based on? Oh, okay.
It was nothing, it was just good fortune, and I think we decided that I could not appeal the 21-5 compliance decision, because then I would have had to have another kid, and that just wasn't going to happen. So anyway, it was just good fortune and fortuitous timing.
So how are you managing today? Oh, I know we might be getting, what time is it? No, we still have some time, yes? Okay.
Well, all of my kids are at home. They're not babies anymore, so that does make it a little easier. They've been very much willing to tolerate my lack of intervention. We've been fortunate that the public schools have risen to the occasion, and everyone's sort of doing okay. I wish we had more rooms in our house. I wish that we have a lot going on, obviously, at work, and there's a ton to do right now for us as a company. So I really have had to spend a lot of my time really managing the situations that we're getting into, as a company. The kids have just been extraordinarily resilient and good-natured about the whole thing for the most part. And every so often, a battle will break out, and we have to do something about it.
Yeah.
It's been.
So if I may have a question. looking back at your career, professional, educational, what if you could change one thing, either time-wise or choice, what you would have done differently now?
Gosh.
Just to give a hope to the student, you know, cannot be perfect. So.
I don't know. I mean, I ascribe to a certain philosophy, which is don't regret the things that didn't happen. Just like embrace the things that did, because we all know that you don't get everything, and just gotta focus on the things that do happen. So I honestly, I can't think of a thing that I would change necessarily. I feel honestly, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but I honestly feel very fortunate to have happened to have been in the right place at the right time at these moments where I had experiences that I will never forget. I mean, just all these experiences at USTR, closing a negotiation is just an extraordinary thing. Representing the US in Geneva, extraordinary. No one deserves that kind of thing. Pass legislation on the Hill is extraordinary. I feel completely blessed that I was able to be there at that time. And so, you know, who knows what what's to come, but I can't complain about what's happened so far.
And going forward now, you've been, how long have you been at Pfizer now?
Just a little over a year.
Oh, what timing.
Yeah, I know.
And just tell us a little bit about the size of your group and what's involved.
So we're small but mighty. There's 3 of us here in Washington, and then I've got there's 1 person out in Brussels, and they're all so talented and so smart about our industry and delight. So that's us, and you know, we cover the globe. So
do you take interns? I mean,
yes, actually, we had a terrific intern last year. So we do from time to time take interns. And I actually I try to stay relevant. So I actually, our intern helped co-author an article that will hopefully be published in one of the Columbia Law journals. So,
wow.
So we try to give our interns good experiences, and so yeah.
So I think some people on the call may want to ask, how do you apply for this internship? I know at the Stimson Center we're doing interns. They're already hired for the summer, but they're remote internships. And so, what kind of internships do you all have at Pfizer?
That's a great. Given the current dynamic, you know what? If they reach out to me, I will connect them to the appropriate people to navigate Pfizer's internship program.
And given our audience, I assume that you take also international interns, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Right. One last question, because I know we have to close. So I've worked in many different countries and lived, and I find it very different, even in the law firms. You know, the difference between a UK and a US one, amount of hours and things like that. I didn't work in those firms, but my friends who did. So I don't know if you've had that type of experience yourself, or if you've witnessed it, or you see how the dynamics are different. I had a friend who was on a US Senate committee, and close to my age, it was about 10 years ago. She said, this is a young person's job, you know, because of the hours. So any ideas there, or discussion of work-life balance in different countries? And
yeah, I mean, I did have experience when I was during college. I did spend a summer working for Kirin Beer in Tokyo. It was I lived in the company dorm, and I went to work every day, and it was a very special experience for me. That was a classic. You know, it felt like a classic large Japanese corporation experience. Very different from the experiences that I have had, certainly in the private sector here, but in all my other positions. You know, it's interesting. I've had the good fortune of having been, you know, involved in some of these conversations that are happening right now, particularly in the Asia Pacific, around the workforce. And I think that there's a lot that's changing. And so I think it would be interesting to see what things are like today in large companies in Japan and elsewhere. What you say about the Hill being a young person's job, that might be true. But I don't know. It's exciting. It's exciting at any age.
Well, you had an amazing career, and we can't thank you enough for spending this time with us. And we look forward to your continued work on the Washington Foreign Law Society Board and programs. And I think we may have developed one program here on e-commerce already. Maybe not for, we can get some people involved in that. But Juliana, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you so much. I really thank Deborah for developing this idea of cocktail and coffee, and to Elissa to be the first one to set the bar very high. Stay tuned for the next one, which will be very soon, June the 2nd, with Melissa Jones. So please stay tuned. You will receive, if you are in our mailing list, you will receive our notice for the next one. And come forward as well with your interest, your idea. We are here to be very flexible to even tailor a program for you if you have a specific interest. And for now, thank you and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.